The air hangs thick with the metallic tang of blood, mingling with the acrid smoke from wagons still smoldering on the riverbank. You hear it first, the low, guttural moans of the wounded, rising like a tide over the splash of the Saone's current. Then the cries sharpen, piercing the dusk. Not just men, but voices higher, fractured, pleading in a tongue that twists like wind through mountain pines. Bodies bob in the water, skirts heavy with mud and red, arms flailing not for purchase but for children already lost beneath the waves. Roman javelins whistle through the haze, thudding into flesh with mechanical precision. A girl no more than 16 summers, her hair unbound and matted, clutches a woven basket of bread, now sodden and useless. She stumbles from the shallows, eyes wide as the legionaries close in, their shields a wall of iron faces. One reaches for her, not with a blade, but a hand that promises something slower than death. She twists away, toward the tree line, but the mud sucks at her feet like a grave already dug. Behind her, the camp erupts, tents collapsing under torchlight, shadows of women herded like cattle, their screams swallowed by the roar of triumphant horns. This is no battlefield of heroes. This is erasure, one life at a time. And as the sun dips, painting the river crimson, you wonder, how does a man turn a people's hope into this? What you're about to hear involves the systematic destruction of families, including acts of violence against women and children during a desperate migration. These events are drawn from ancient accounts and modern evidence, but they remain deeply disturbing. If this pulls too close to the bone, step away, I'll understand completely. For those pressing on, we honor the lost not by lingering on their pain, but by exposing the gears of the empire that ground them down. Let's walk this path together, eyes open to the machine. From the Hook's riverside horror, pull back now, as if rising on thermals over the Jura Mountains. Below sprawls a land squeezed between rivers and ranges, where Celtic tribes like the Helvetii have tilled the soil for generations, their hill forts crowning ridges like watchful elders. It's spring, 58 BC, and the world feels on the cusp of unraveling. To the north, Germanic warbands probe the Rhine like wolves at a fold's edge, their axes hungry for fertile valleys. Southward, Rome's shadow lengthens its province of Transalpine Gaul, a glittering lure of roads and aqueducts, but also a noose tightening around free peoples. Enter Gaius Julius Caesar, proconsul of this frontier, a man whose debts in Rome demand glory abroad. At 42, he's no raw tribune anymore. Whispers from the Senate paint him as both savior and schemer, his legions a tool for personal ascent. This wasn't random savagery, a clash of barbarians and civilized. This was a machine of conquest, oiled by fear and ambition, designed to chew through migrations and spit out provinces. The Helvetii, pressed by overcrowding and invaders, sought only a new home in the west lands of oak groves and endless meadows. But Caesar reframed their flight as invasion, their desperation as threat. In blocking their path, he didn't just halt a tribe, he ignited 8 years of war that would claim hundreds of thousands, reshaping Europe in blood and stone. Why does this echo now? Because borders drawn in panic, migrations twisted into menace, these are the sparks that light empires' fuses. And in the Helvetii's story, we see the cost when one man's machine meets a people's dream. Long before the river ran red, the Helvetii forged their world from the bones of the earth. Picture the Swiss plateau, a cradle of lakes and forests where 4 cantons, Verbigeni, Tigurini, Tugeni, and a 4th unnamed coalesced into a confederation, fierce as the Alps that hemmed them. Their territory stretched some 240 miles long, 180 wide, hemmed by the Rhine's roar to the north, the Jura's jagged spine eastward, Lake Geneva's glassy expanse to the south, and the Rhone's serpentine flow. Here, oppida, like Aventicum, rose as fortified hearts, ringed by timber, palisades, and granaries bulging with emmer wheat and barley. 400 villages dotted the valleys, their roundhouses thatched with rye, smoke curling from hearths where bards spun tales of druidic wisdom and battles against the Suebi across the river. The Helvetii weren't wanderers by choice, they were warriors by necessity, their young men scarred from skirmishes that kept the Germanic tide at bay. Valorous, Caesar would later call them, the bravest of Gauls for their unyielding frontier watch. But valor has limits when soil wears thin and mouths multiply. By the late 62nd BC, the pressure built like storm clouds over the peaks. Germanic migrations, Teutons and Cimbri, echoes still fresh in Roman memory, had shoved the Boii westward, compressing the Helvetii into ever tighter folds. Population swelled, 400 villages strained under the weight of elders, warriors, wives, and the young who dreamed of wider horizons. Trade routes to the Mediterranean trickled luxuries, amber beads from the Baltic, wine amphorae from Massilia, but whispers of richer lands beyond the Rhone stirred unrest. Enter Orgetorix, the noblest among them, wealthiest in cattle and bronze torques, his hall a nexus of feasts and plots. In 61 BC, with consuls Messala and Piso holding sway in distant Rome, he kindled a fire of ambition. Lust for kingship drove him to conspire with equals, Casticus of the Sequani, son of a Roman friend, and Dumnorix of the Aedui, brother to the druid Diviciacus, whose oracles swayed the oaks. They pledged mutual crowns, envisioning a Gaul remade under Helvetian spear. Orgetorix swayed his people with honeyed words, their valor unmatched, their lands too cramped for such glory. Why scratch at barren slopes when western meadows beckoned, fat with game and grain? 2 years they prepared, sowing extra seed, buying oxen by the herd, forging peace with neighbors. The Raurazzi, Tulingi, Latobrigi signed on. Even the Boii, exiled from Noricum, joined the exodus. By ordinance, the march was set for the third spring. But Orgetorix's web unraveled. Accused of treason, he fell on his sword amid a blaze of defiance, his body consumed before accusers could bind it. The Helvetii mourned briefly, then pressed on. Ambition outlives its architect. Caesar, meanwhile, was no stranger to machines of his own making. Born to a patrician house teetering on ruin, he clawed upward through Sulla's purges, pirate ransoms, and pontifical robes. By 59 BC, as consul, he'd forged the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, a pact sealed in backroom oaths and shared spoils. But power demanded proof. His proconsulship over Cisalpine, Transalpine, and Illyrian Gauls was a canvas for conquest, his debts a whip at his back. Formative scars marked him. At 18, kidnapped by Cilician pirates, he'd mocked their ransom demands before crucifying them upon rescue, a taste for calculated cruelty. Then came the Spanish governorship, where he wept at Alexander's statue, not for glory's lack, but its delay. These weren't boyish whims. They forged a mind that saw peoples as pieces, alliances to break, migrations to halt. In Gaul, he inherited a patchwork, the province secure in the south, but northern tribes fractious, Germanic shadows lengthening. The Aedui, old allies, begged protection from Sequani German pacts. Diviciacus, their druid envoy, warned of Ariovistus's hordes, seizing thirds of fertile lands. Caesar listened, nodded, planned. Trauma lingered from his youth exile under Sulla, the forum's intrigues, but it honed him into a strategist who turned defense into dominion. When scouts brought word of Helvetian fires, lighting the night 12 oppida torched, villages reduced to ash, he saw not refugees, but a flood to dam. And then the census tablets changed everything. As the Helvetii forded the Rhone on makeshift rafts that March, Greek script tallies from their scribes fell into Roman hands. 368,000 souls, 92,000 warriors, the rest elders, women, children, laden with 3 months' grain. Historians debate the tally's truth. Modern eyes see exaggeration, perhaps half that number in truth, but the intent rang clear. A nation on the move, wagons groaning under looms and sickles, herds lowing in the dust. Caesar, encamped at Geneva, tore down the bridge in a frenzy of labor, legionaries felling pines, digging trenches 16 feet deep. He stalled their envoys with honeyed delays, summoning legions XI and 1 Psi from Cisalpine hills. Paranoia crystallized that night under a waxing moon. If the Helvetii pierced the province, allies like the Aedui would shatter. Germans pour through the vacuum. This wasn't protection, it was pretext. By April, his 6 legions, 30,000 shields marched north, a steel serpent uncoiling. The machine whirred to life, its first victims not warriors, but the dream of a people unmoored. But what of the girl in the front ranks, the one who baked the last loaves in her mother's hearth? She didn't know yet how her path would cross a proconsul's blade. Dawn breaks over the Saone's languid curve, that fateful June morning in 58 BC. Mist clings to the willows like a shroud. the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fermenting berries. Reeds whisper against the prows of flat-bottomed boats, each laden with the weight of future's bundles of wool, iron sickles wrapped in oilcloth, infants swaddled against the chill. The Helvetii vanguard, Tigrini Pagus at the fore, poled across in orderly files, their wagons forming a floating barricade against the current's pull. Laughter echoes faintly, a mother's tease to quiet a fretful child, the low chant of drovers urging oxen through the ford. Bibracte's hills loom distant, a smudge of green under bruised skies, but for now, the river is their world, a silver ribbon threading from alpine snows to warmer vales. Non-combatants cluster midstream, old men with tattooed arms, gripping staves, women in plaid cloaks braiding each other's hair for luck, boys skipping stones from the gunwales. The warriors, 4 abreast on the banks, scan the tree line with javelins loose in fist, their torques glinting like captured suns. Peace feels possible here, in this stolen breath between departure and arrival. The Sequani have granted passage for a price. Roman envoys seemed swayed by pleas. Hope, fragile as reed stems, bends but does not break. Amid the flotilla glides Verica, daughter of a Verbigani smith, her hands still raw from packing the family anvil. At 19, she's no stranger to labor forging brooches by firelight, her fingers nimble as a harpist's on bronze wire. But this dawn, she hums an old lay of Epona, horse goddess of the plains, her voice threading through the splash of oars. Verica's world was Aventicum's forge smoke and festival fires, where she danced at Lugnasad with lads whose eyes promised hearth and kin. Now, widowed young by a Suebi, raid her betrothed's torque melted into arrowheads, she travels light, a woolen shift dyed woad blue, a pouch of barley meal, and dreams of meadows where foals might run free. Her aunt, heavy with child, leans on her shoulder, murmuring of the west's endless rivers, fat with salmon. Verica smiles, tracing the swell of that belly. Life persists, even in exodus. She thinks of the elders' tales, ancestors who crossed the Rhine not in flight, but fury, claiming these very hills. What harm in seeking more? The boat grounds softly on the far bank, mud sucking at planks, and Verica steps ashore, basket balanced on hip, her bare feet sinking into loam that smells of promise. Laughter swells again, a boy splashing his sister, elders sharing flagons of mead warmed over braziers. The camp rises like a living thing, tents of stitched hides, fires crackling with venison haunches, bards tuning lyres for the evening's weave of song. Verica helps pitch her kin's shelter, hammering stakes with inherited vigor, her laughter joining the chorus. In this interlude, Gaul feels not foe, but foster mother. She doesn't see the dust cloud yet. Far to the east, the tramp of hobnailed boots, the creak of Roman siege engines on the march. Tension coils like a bowstring drawn taut. Caesar's legions crest the ridge, 3 days' ride distant, their eagle standards slicing the horizon. Scouts return at gallop. The Helvetii rear Latobrigi and Tulingi straggle at the ford, wagons bottlenecked, non-fighters exposed. Diviciacus, the Iadui druid, rides at Caesar's flank, his white robes stark against mail, face etched with the weight of divided loyalties. "They outnumber us 3-1, he murmurs, voice like wind through sacred groves, but their hearts are turned westward, not to war. Caesar nods, eyes narrowed on the map unrolled across his saddle inclines tracing the Saone's bend. Bibracte's ally-held heights. Demands flicker in his mind. Safe passage for allies, tribute from the migrants, a buffer against German flood. But deeper, the machine hums glory for Rome, votes for the Forum, erasure of threats before they bloom. Envoys ride ahead under parley flags. Halt, submit hostages, detour south through Sequani lands. The Helvetii chiefs, Numius and Verudo of the Tigrini, receive them amid the camp's bustle, Verica pausing mid-stitch on a torn cloak to watch the riders dismount. "We seek no quarrel with Rome," Numius declares, his beard braided with silver rings, "only soil to sow our seed." The envoys press. Caesar's legions bar the direct path. Defiance invites steel. Verica catches fragments, words of bridges burned, numbers tallied like cattle, her stomach nodding. Refusal hangs in the air, polite but ironclad. The migration surges on, wagons creaking forward, the Rhone's ghosts too fresh to yield. As dusk falls, the envoys depart with veiled warnings, their horses' hooves drumming retreat. Verica resumes her sewing by firelight. The needles flash a small defiance. Unaware the gods have already turned their faces. Restraint fractures at first light. Caesar's order ripples down the line. No quarter for the stragglers. The 8th Legion, veterans of Crassus's forges, fans out along the bank, Pila loosed in volleys that arc like predatory birds. The Latabrigi boats shatter under impact, timbers splintering, screams blooming as bodies tumble into the froth. Verica, a mile upstream with the main host, hears the distant thunder first as thunder, then as something sharper, the snap of wood and wet thuds. Panic blooms in the rear. Women scoop children from shallows. Elders hobble toward the tree line. Warriors wheeling from vanguard to form hasty shields. But the Romans are relentless. A tide of red cloaks surging from the mist, swords drawn for the harvest. Caesar watches from a rise, Diviciacus at his side, the druid's face ashen. This serves no oak's wisdom, he whispers, but Caesar's gaze is fixed, calculating the break. The act unfolds in glimpses, a legionary's grip on a fleeing arm, the crumple of forms under hobnailed advance, the river churning with the unmoored. Verica freezes as echoes reach her column, cries carrying on the wind, kin calling names lost to the current. She clutches her aunt, the unborn kicking in protest, as chiefs bellow orders to circle the wagons. The machine grinds on, indifferent to please. Word spreads like fever through the host that eve, around fires dimmed by dread. Survivors limp in 20,000, perhaps, from the ford's maw tails spilling in hushed clusters. Romans striking not at spears, but baskets and babes. Verica binds a cousin's gashed leg, her hands trembling on linen strips. The boy's whimpers, a litany of, why cross? Why now? Diviciacus, summoned in secret by Aedui kin among the migrants, slips through the pickets under moonless veil. His face, lined by auguries and alliances, mirrors their fracture. Caesar calls it defense. He confides to a huddle of elders, voice cracking like dry branches. But it's the old grudge, the Tigerini, who slew his wife's kin a generation past. Verica overhears, needle poised, the name Cassius burning like bile. This wasn't about one ford, one refusal. It was the Republic's ledger, old debts tallied in fresh blood, migrations recast as marauding to justify the lash. The Helvetii, once Rome's scourge and defeat, now pawns in a proconsul's bid for immortality. And in the wider Gaul, whispers stir Aedui fields trampled. Sequani borders breach the machine's teeth, bared for all to fear. Verica stares into the flames, seeing not embers, but the forge where her world melted. One parallel lingers, sharp as a druid's sickle. Today, when borders harden against the desperate, do we honor the displaced or merely tally their crossing as crime? The camp quiets, breath sinking with the river's murmur, but sleep evades. Dawn will bring Bibracte's slopes, where the wager turns to war. But that reckoning, it waits, coiled in the hills. But that wasn't the worst part. Shift now to the proconsul's tent, canvas walls flickering under oil lamps, the air thick with the ink of dispatches, and the sour reek of unwashed ambition. Caesar paces, map weighted by a Gallic torque pried from a Ford corpse, his mind a ledger of legions and lies. Diviciacus stands rigid, the druid's staff a silent rebuke, as aides relay tallies, 6,000, unburied by the Saone, wagons torched like pyres. They flee to Bibracte. An optio reports, voice steady as parade ground bark. Our allies' heartland, begging grain. Caesar halts, fingers drumming the vellum Bibracte, the Aedui's oppidum, a fortress of timber and stone atop Mont Bivré, its granaries the lifeblood of half a province. To let the migrants breach it, allies fracture, Germans scent weakness. No, the pursuit sharpens. Orders fly, forage parties to the rear, cavalry screening flanks, the machine's incentives clear. Plunder for the rankers, promotion for centurions, provinces for the commander. Diviciacus shifts. His exile from Aedui intrigues a ghost at his heels brother Dumnorix's plots. The very migration he'd half stirred in youth. Mercy bends the oak, he ventures, eyes on Caesar's shadowed profile, but steel breaks it. The proconsul waves it off, dictating to a scribe, reinforce the Aedui, promise restitution. Yet in the reports he crafts for Rome, the Helvetii morph from displaced kin to feral horde, their fires prelude to conquest. The escalation unfurls not in thunderclaps, but the grind of miles. From the Saone's banks, the Helvetii snake westward, a serpent of dust and desperation, wagons lashed into lagers each night against nocturnal raids. Caesar shadows them, his legions a grey wolf pack, 8th and IX probing flanks, X thundering pursuits that claim stragglers by dawn. Numbers toll in human measure, villages emptied in the host's wake, Aedui hamlets stripped bare, their folk fleeing to Bibracte's dubious shelter. Incentives hum through the ranks, a sesterce per head captured, double for the hail. Centurions eye the eagle's nod, their hobnails polished for Senate parades. Verica trudges mid-column, basket traded for a staff, her aunt's labor pangs a harbinger ignored amid the march's dirge. Whispers of the ford haunt them 6,000 gone, families sundered, the river a tomb for the unready. But breathers pierce the haze. One noon, under a linden's dappled shade, a Tigrini girl shares wild strawberries, tart bursts on the tongue, laughter bubbling as they braid garlands from yarrow. For Epona, she says, to speed our hooves. Verica nods, the irony soft as pollen goddess of passage, blind to borders. Geographic shift comes swift. The host veers south, skirting Sequani tolls, into the Morven's oak-thick folds where bore root unseen. Here, the machinery gleams in microcosm, a Roman foraging band, 20 horse under a young tribune, stumbles on a Latabrigi rearguard. No pitched clash, just the clash of wills. The tribune, fresh from Cisalpine villas, demands tribute, grain for passage, hostages for peace. The Latabrigi chief, a grizzled arm ring bearer, refuses with spearpoint courtesy his folk, Boii exiles among them, no Rome's gifts as chains. Skirmish erupts, arrows feathering shields, a Roman mount screaming as it rears. The tribune falls, throat slit mid-plea, his men scattering like chaff. Word races to Caesar. Outrage, pretext, doubled. He unleashes the cavalry, Numidian auxiliaries, their javelins a blurring storm that harries the flanks for days, claiming hundreds in ambuscade. Verica witnesses one such. From a ridge, she spies the charge. Dust devils rising as riders quarter a cluster of foragers, women gleaning berries. A brief halt turned fatal. They vanish into the underbrush, not all swift enough. A scream lingers, cut short. Diviciacus, riding courier between camps, bears the brunt. Aedui elders decry the spill onto their lands, yet Caesar's missives bind them tighter, aid my legions, or forfeit alliance. The druid pens auguries in secret, oak leaves trembling under his quill, foretelling fracture. Incentives chain them all. Helvetii chiefs flog dissenters to hold the line. Romans auction captives on the march, a widow for a jug of wine, her eyes hollow as she stumbles chained. Whole clans dissolve, the West's promise fading like mist. Yet, in the quiet hours, as stars wheel over the Morvan, a Boii elder carves runes on a waystone, invoking forgotten gods. Beauty amid the rot, fireflies pulsing like lost souls, a counterpoint to the machine's relentless churn. But Bibracte's horns will call soon, and with them, the wager's cruel turn. What crack would the slopes reveal? What happened next would alarm an entire empire. The Morvan yields to Bibracte's throne. Mont Bouvray, a whaleback of limestone crowned by ramparts that snake 3 miles, its gates yawning like a dragon's maw. July's sun beats merciless, turning the air to broth, cicadas droning a dirge over time-scented slopes. The Helvetii crest the rise, spent from the chase, oxen lathered, wheels splintered, the host a ragged quilt of pagi banners limp in the heat. Verica slogs upward, staff biting earth, her aunt delivered of a son in a roadside thicket, the babe mewling against her breast. Camp sprawls in the saddle, lagers ringed by spear walls, smiths hammering fellows by dawn, druids circling fires with mistletoe chants, warriors, faces painted woad blue, drill in hollows, their long swords flashing like adder tongues. But fatigue gnaws, grain sours in the damp, fevers flicker through the young. Chiefs convene in a princeps tent of bull hide, maps scratched on bark, push to the Santones' sea-lapped plains, or stand and shatter the pursuer. Numaeus advocates flight let the hills swallow their steel, but Tigrini hotheads bay for blood, the ford's ghosts demanding reckoning. Caesar arrives at twilight, his legions coiling below like vipers in wait. From the van, he surveys the oppidum sprawl granaries, bulging with Aedui tribute, springs bubbling cold from clefts. Diviciacus meets him at the pickets, the druid's eyes hollowed by portents. Bibracte shelters us both, he urges, grant parley. The oak's whisper of storm. Caesar demurs, his gaze tracing the heights. Tactical folly to assault uphill, yet idleness invites Gallic revolt. Supplies dwindle, mules slaughtered for stew, men gnawing leather straps. The machine demands momentum, halt here, and the Senate smells weakness. Dawn breaks with horns. Legions deploy in triple line, pila cocked, the X at center like a spear point. The Helvetii sally forth, 90,000 strong, their war chariots thundering down gullies, infantry a tide of plaid and fury. Time slows in the clash's prelude, dust motes hang suspended, a raven croaks omen from an oak. Verica's hands clench on her staff as the host erupts, women and elders herded to the rear, their chants a ward against the onrushing bronze. The act crests in waves, implications veil drawn tight. Roman cohorts anchor on the lower slopes, shields locked as chariots wheel and harry, javelins glancing off mail like hail on slate. The Helvetii press, a human avalanche, swords hacking at pila shafts, cries in Gaulish rolling like thunder. Caesar feeds reserves, the aid wheeling to flank, their advance a slow, inexorable grind. Upward they claw, turf churning to mire, the air rent by bronze on bronze, the wet suck of steel finding flesh. Verica, tasked with water run to the lines, crests a knoll and freezes. Below, the melee boils a Tigerini youth gutted mid-charge, his fall a puppet's twitch. Legionaries, baying as they envelop a chariot crew. The driver's mate dragged, screaming from the yoke. No gore lingers in the telling, cut to the route's birth. By noon, the Helvetii waver chariots bogged. Infantry spent their line buckling like overtaxed timber. Panic blooms. Rear ranks trample forward press. The slope a charnel of the fallen. Caesar unleashes the full tide. Auxiliaries streaming from cover. The machine's jaws clamping shut. The crack shatters at the ridge's crest. A Helvetii wedge, Verbigini berserkers at its tip, punches through the X's thin center swords, reaping like scythes. A centurion's plume severed in spray. For a heartbeat, the legions teeter. Caesar's standard dipping amid the press. Diviciacus, from the Aedui wing, hurls his javelin true, felling the wedge's champion. But the druid knows, this is no omen, but overreaches echo the Helvetii, hearts unbroken, fight for kin, not crowns. Verica reaches the lines then, skin sloshing, only to wheel as horns blare retreat. The host fractures, warriors covering flight, women bundling babes into wagons that bolt for the valley. Roman pursuit is merciless cavalry, lancing the fugitives, infantry mopping the dead. Verica stumbles into the melee's edge, staff snapping on a shield. Before kin haul her back, the babes wail her anchor. By dusk, the slopes steam with the spent, pyres lighting the dead in hurried right. Caesar claims the field, but the toll mocks triumph. Thousands uncounted, the machine's cost in shattered lives. Verica collapses by a spring, washing blood not her own from her face, the water turning pink. The breaking, not steel, but spirit the Helvetii, dream intact, now orphans of their road. Envoys ride under truce, next morn, surrender's ink drying on bark. But in that pause, as ravens wheel, Verica whispers to the child, we endure. The legacy of such cracks? Empires fracture from within, when the ground fights back. Surrender came not in glory, but the hush of defeat. The Helvetii remnant, perhaps 110,000, if Caesar's scribes held true, yielded their arms on Bibracte's flanks, wagons emptied of all but bones and memory. Caesar dictated terms with expeditious steel. Return to the burned lands, rebuild as Rhine wardens, a human bulwark against the German tide. No triumph parade for him yet. Instead, grain levies to the Aedui, hostages from every pagus to bind their oaths. Verica's clan trudged eastward, babe at breast, the west's meadows a mirage dissolved in dust. Diviciacus watched them go. His augury's soured brother Dumnorix fled into exile, the Aedui chained tighter to Rome's yoke. Caesar pressed on that autumn, wheeling to crush Ariovistus's Suebi on Vosges slopes, his machine devouring 800 miles in a season. Gaul simmered, tribes murmuring of the Helvetian road, as harbinger. Long-term, the Confederation withered, oppida raised, druids scattered, their tongue yielding to Latin's march. Ironic twist, the very migrants Caesar saved from wandering became sedentary shields. Their plateau, a Roman breadbasket by Augustus's reign. Power shifted, not to the bold, but the binders. Caesar's Commentaries, penned in camp tent haste, recast carnage as crusade, his debts paid in forum votes. The Helvetii, reduced to footnotes, their fire's ashes fertilizing vineyards that toast empire's health. Modernize first pierced the veil in the 19th century, when Montbouvret's digs, unearthed by Bibracte's ghosts. Amphorae shards stamped with Massilian wine, iron fibulae twisted in the crush, a child's clay horse baked hard in pyre's bite. But the true revelation came piecemeal, soil by soil. In the 1,980 seconds, excavations at La Tène, the very cradle of Celtic iron, yielded no mass graves from the migration, just steady hearths and traded beads, whispering of a people rooted, not restless. Then, in 2015, Marco Milella, a bioarchaeologist at Vienna's Natural History Museum, sifted bones from Basel's riverbanks, femurs etched by blade, not age, cranial fractures from blunt force, not fall. No hordes fleeing en masse, he concluded, peering through microscopes at isotope traces in teeth, signs of local lives, not nomadic flux. Selective influxes, stable folk under pressure. His team's 2023 paper, scanning Swiss plateau graves, confirmed. Helvetii women bore scars of labor, not flight, their diets rooted in alpine grains, unbroken till the Roman tally. Tangible proof emerged in 58 BC's Echo a Geneva Trench, Caesar's hasty wall, its post holes carbon-dated to that spring, oak stakes charred as if pulled from the god's own fire. Milella held a shard aloft in a Zurich lecture hall, the room hushed. These weren't invaders, they were neighbors, nudged by the Rhine's chill. Human drama laced the find a woman's grave near Aventicum, her torque unlooted, fingers curled as if braiding fate's thread. Milella, descendant of Italian migrants himself, traced her lineage in DNA coils. Celtic stock, mingled with faint Germanic whispers, a life interrupted mid-stride. Why does this matter, 2 millennia on? One parallel grounds us. Today's migrant caravans, painted as threats at razor-wire frontiers, echo the Helvetii's wagons families fleeing flood or feud, only to meet the machine's indifferent halt. Power's lesson? It thrives on reframing. Desperation as danger, the displaced as horde. Resistance blooms in the overlooked, the druid's hidden verse, the woman's unyielding step. Human nature? We build bulwarks from fear, but memory's the true Rhine, unfordable. This teaches that erasure fails when bones bear witness, when stories outlast steel. The universal truth, no machine grinds forever. The earth remembers, and the march resumes. Return to that riverside dusk, the Saone's current slowed, its red wash faded to silt. Where cries once rent the air, now quiet holds willows dipping fronds in benediction, a lone corvid calling kin from the reeds. Verica's basket, upturned then, might cradle wildflowers now, her son's laughter threading the breeze. The machine rusted, Caesar's eagles perched on Capitoline perches, but the Helvetii endured, their plateau blooming under new names. They were meant to vanish into Gaul's vast maw, their songs silenced by the Saone's murmur, but they didn't. Tablets tallying their tally, bones whispering of rooted lives, Milella's lenses pulling truth from dust, these are their voices, etched in earth and archive. And now they're here with you, because you chose to listen, letting their steps echo in your own. If this story stirred something in you, the fragility of borders, the weight of unwritten lives, drop a comment below. What migration from history haunts you most, and why? Your words keep these tales alive. In the end, empires fall, but the march goes on.